Breaking news, emergency alert, late night emergency alert. It appears as though we are about to see a war erupt on the Korean Peninsula, which may well go nuclear. This story just broke, and I had a whole presentation ready to go before this story. There was a B-1B nuclear-capable bomber that went down near Ellsworth Air Base, which is formerly known for housing nuclear weapons. It's going to be used for that purpose in the future. Once again, for all intents and purposes, we can assume that it is incredibly strategic, and it is incredibly suspicious that a $500 million nuclear-capable bomber could go down as a result of fog, as they're saying. We also had a very mysterious nationwide internet glitch here today in Canada that I'll talk about. The Houthis have crossed the red line today, the final red line. They were given an ultimatum by the coalitional forces yesterday, and today they fired on a U.S. warship, which means, as per that ultimatum, that now there's going to be a military intervention, i.e. war. We also have to talk about a British Air Force colonel who suspects that the Ukraine is about to receive, if not has already received, approximately 60 F-16s, which the Russians have perceived to be and expressed their concern that these are nuclear-capable F-16s. We also have Biden passing an emergency legislation on cybersecurity for nuclear weapons. We have our inside source in military foodstuffs indicating that embassies continue to stockpile food for continuity of government planning. Of course, we broke that story back in September before the October 7th shit hit the fan. Canada has delayed all flights to Tel Aviv until April. Germany evacuating Lebanon. Poland is moving forces towards the Ukrainian border under the guise, of course, of an exercise. We have a massive attack that just took place on Crimea that the Russians claim was repelled, but this is getting incredibly serious. They're getting very close to busting that linchpin, which is the Kerch Bridge, and when that happens, we're a stone's throw away from nuclear Armageddon, if you ask me. Russia is using North Korean medium-range ballistic missiles. This is a huge step up from small arms ammunition, and then, of course, artillery rounds. And now they're using ballistic missiles. And they're also talking about, in talks with the Iranians, to get ballistic missiles from them, which likely means, guys, that Iran, North Korea are all now under that Russian, Sino-China nuclear umbrella. This is a major development today. And we also have GPS jamming abound everywhere from Kaliningrad to Ukraine. So this is big. Now, this incident that has transpired here on this island, this contested island, I don't know if I have an actual image of it offhand, like that's in higher resolution, but it's a small island. Apparently, there were North Korean warships, and don't quote me on this. This is fresh off the press. Again, I was about to do a presentation and this news came up. And I'm not at all surprised. We've been talking about the North Korean escalation for months. Now, what's happened is the North Koreans have done some live fire drills, some exercises on this island, or around this island, and they've evacuated an island of 2,000 people, Yongpyeng Island, okay? So this is the island, and this is where it's located, so right along the demarcation line. So this situation, because I recall, now that I should say the South Korean Joint Chiefs of Staff have decided that they are going to retaliate in some way, in some show of force. Now, I need to reiterate, this was not a direct attack. This was a live fire drill conducted near the island. Now, of course, we're going to play the victim and say, well, why were the North Koreans doing this? It's very likely that this was a tit-for-tat escalation and Kim Jong-un didn't roll out of bed one day and just say, okay, I'm going to provoke the nuclear submarines that are right on my border. It likely didn't happen that way. In fact, the South Koreans and the Americans have been doing these drills. They have nuclear submarines parked right on the borders there, and shit's getting very, very intense. And if you think that this doesn't involve China, then you're mistaken. This is China's back door. This is China's pit bull, and China will not sit idly by while the North Koreans are laid to waste, which means that this is a potential nexus for a world war. Now, it's incredible that it didn't just come out of the blue, though, right? This has been percolating under the surface. As we've been saying, there's been just a stepwise, predictable escalation with the North Koreans. Kim Jong-un said, we're stockpiling food, we're preparing for war, we are scrapping the reunification plans. And now today, John Kirby comes out and says, what does he say? He said that, well, you could just tell with his body language, with this speech that he was giving, that there was a sense of urgency and panic there and consternation that you don't typically see. Discomfort in his voice, almost like he knew this situation was reaching a fever pitch. So this is very concerning, guys, that this situation might be escalating. And like I said just a few days ago, when this shit pops off, you're going to forget about everything else, because this is going to be it. And of course, there are plenty of theaters of conflict which are currently escalating right now all around the world. And this is just but one of them, but it's become so hard now to keep track of all these different escalations, from Ukraine to the Middle East to now North Korea and eventually Taiwan and China. My goodness, I'm going to have to start doing 4 videos a day. This situation is getting out of control. Now, this B-1B Lancer bomber incident. Some people are saying, it's no big deal. You know, the usual suspects, oh, you're blowing it out of proportion. My sergeant told me that it was nothing to worry about and to go back to my duties. Okay, if that's what you want to believe, that's just fine. I'll use my God-given ability to think analytically. Now, this bomber that went down, so you can see explosion here. This looks like a surveillance camera that we caught a still image from, so it's low resolution, and you can see a trail of smoke. Now, the 4 pilots ejected, and they're saying that this was due to fog, okay? $500 million in today's dollars, when it was built, probably about $250 million. $500 million B-1B Lancer that are still in use. In fact, there was one or a couple training in Incirlik base in Turkey, of course, where they house nuclear weapons. Now, people will tell you that these are not capable of carrying nuclear weapons because all of that, all of the mechanisms used to deploy those have been scrapped. But I don't think it would take a whole lot to retrofit these things in order to do that. Regardless, this is a very strategic base. Okay, let me see if I have the image here of where the actual base is. This is Ellsworth Air Base, lots of the nuclear missile silos. It's right in the middle of all 3 concentrations of nuclear missile silos. It used to have missile silos, and they're also going to be replacing the B-21, the new stealth nuclear bombers are going here. And of course, they're going to have nuclear weapons, which means nuclear weapons will be stored there, which likely means they're already stored there. We can infer that that's probably the case. Now, here's the explanation that they have provided. B-1B crash. Today, while attempting to land on the installation. At the time of the accident, it was on a training mission. There were 4 aircrew on board. And again, they're attributing this to fog. Now, if you believe that fog is going to bring down a $500 million piece of equipment, strategic equipment like this, then I got some nice beachfront property up here. It's near a place called Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. It's nice 365 days a year. Girls in bikinis as far as the eye can see. Send me an email and I'll get you the deets. But in all seriousness, I mean, if fog could bring down one of these planes, guys, don't you think that Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping would be investing in mass production of fog machines? I mean, let's get real. There was something going on here. Was this just decrepit infrastructure and aging outdated military technology. It's possible. I mean, these things aren't that old. They're old, but, you know, like, I mean, 40 years-ish old, I presume, is not that old. It's old, but it's not that old, you know? There's things that are still up in the air that are way older than that. So could this have been the result of some sort of sabotage, cyber attack, or was it just incompetence, or was it just aging equipment? And is this where, because we've seen all kinds of accidents now, and the more military activity you see, the higher the DEFCON level, the more birds in the sky, the more you're going to see this type of accident happen, because, you know, just the law of probabilities, right? The more birds in the sky, the greater the likelihood that the shit is going to hit the fan with one of them. But this is very concerning, because it's not the first time that we've seen this level of incompetency around a nuclear base. Last year, at one of the Minot Missileer bases, they fired some high-ranking officers and his entire crew because I presume they were saying it was something to do with incompetence. We've seen a lot of weird nuclear mishaps on all of the NATO ally fronts, including the UK, who had a submarine catch on fire. Some people think that might be related in some way to an act of sabotage or cyber, even though these systems are air-gapped, I understand, and there's very tight communication controls. You just never know. In case in point, you have this happening today, in which we had a very strange internet outage anomaly across Canada. I think it was just across Canada. It could have even been in parts of the United States. But get a load of this. The entirety of the Canadian internet providers, all the various platforms online, were down. You could see this glitch. Now, it was short-lived, so it wasn't long. I presume most things were impacted. I don't think Interac was impacted, but Rogers was one of the primary services that was down. Now, of course, immediately in watching the movie Leave the World Behind, and long before that, we were talking about cybersecurity threats, but that made the problem mainstream. But we've been talking about it for years, just like every other crisis that is currently arising right now. But the interesting thing about this, I was talking to my cybersecurity expert friend, and he was running some tests, and he indicated that his Starlink was also showing some anomalies, mainly that its security was breached, so that it was no longer a secure connection for some reason. When it's typically, when everything is up and running, it's a secure connection. So that relayed to him that potentially there is some relation between Starlink, or some dependency on Starlink, or connection, interconnect between the grid, be it ground-based relay systems or something, some shady dystopian government stuff, I'm sure. But hey, we're told that Elon Musk is a nice guy and not to worry about it. He also explained to me that how you would bring the internet down, and that why this could have been related to either a power outage on the network somewhere, or it could have been a hack, He thought it was a hack. And the reason why is because how it works, and I'm just a dullard when it comes to this kind of stuff, but he explained it to me like I was a dullard. He said, look, the internet is like the waterworks system, There's a primary pipeline from which all the bandwidth comes from, and that is distributed to all the various telecoms providers, who then scale that down and they distribute it to everybody, like your home-based internet fiber optic connection or what have you, or your over-the-air internet, And so it's a system of pipelines. Now, throughout the waterworks system, you have pumps and you have these various switches throughout. It's very much like the electrical grid in a lot of ways. And it's at these junctions, or at those bottlenecks, where at the mouth of the pipeline, so to speak, where if there is some sort of disruption, be it a power disruption, and you need power to power those water pumps. And so this is kind of the metaphor he's using, is that if at one of those junctions you don't have the appropriate water pumping station, then those people are not going to get their internet. And this is how you can bring the internet down as a whole for a very large amount of people, and why everything would be affected at once if some sort of cyber threat was able to get in there and disrupt that node on the network, that critical node on the network. Just like we have transformers for the power grid, you take out enough of those transformers and the whole power grid comes down. In the same way, the internet is very similar. But he said that, you know, it's very similar to what happened in that movie, Leave the World Behind, because it assumes that based on the fact that Starlink was impacted in some way, was there some impact on satellites within this, whatever this was, this hack? But it was a similar scenario because, of course, nobody knew what went on. We still don't know what went on as a result of it. But anyways, that's just one of the stories that we have to talk about today. Now, let's move on here. I'm sure the North Korean situation is already progressing. My prognostication on that is that the South and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, they're going to authorize a drill exercise that is going to match that. And it could just ramp up from there, or it could fizzle out. Everybody could back down at the end of the day. I'm sure there will be some aggressive negotiation with the Chinese and the Americans and the UN, and everybody will get involved. Let's hope. I think it has to ultimately get to that point at some point, because there's just been a clear path of near vertical escalation on that front. And the South Koreans have said that they're not going to take any shit, and that if you get fired on by the North Koreans, fire back and then, you know, ask questions later. So we also have this situation developing in Crimea, okay? And this is big. Not a lot of people are paying enough attention to what's going on here in Crimea. Everybody's writing off the F-16s as no big deal. According to a British aviation colonel, Breton Gordon, F-16s and NATO troops on the ground by the end of the year. Emphasis on troops on the ground by the end of the year. He says that there's going to be at least 60 F-16s there within the next few months, if not the next few weeks, if not already starting to present themselves there. Now, this is important because, of course, Zelensky has made it his stated purpose to target the Kerch Bridge, which, of course, is the linchpin for a lot of resources here in Crimea. Now, the Russian Black Sea Fleet has already been pushed back into the Black Sea. You have talks of the UK wanting to put demining ships here along the shipping corridor, but Turkey will not let them, okay? And this is a big point of contention amongst NATO, because, of course, Turkey is a NATO member. But, of course, the Russians are not admitting that any of the targets that Ukraine was targeting in Crimea were hit. They were saying they shot everything down. I personally don't trust anything either the Russians or the Ukrainians say, for that matter. I think half of it is just complete and utter BS, which is sad because I can only imagine what else in history we've been lied to about. But this is from Rybar, a pro-Russian, obviously a Russian military graphics analysis website. And they outline all of the targets and the failed attacks. But what's important to understand here is that these F-16s are so critical because, of course, they do have the ability to carry nuclear weapons. The Russian defense minister has said that they are problematic for that purpose. And even the Russians admit that they don't entirely have a solution for it because, of course, they're going to be deploying them in sneaky ways under the radar, possibly from NATO countries. Now, the big question is when all this pops off, because it's starting to look like it's all going to pop off at the same time. Why? Because the Russians and the Iranians and the North Koreans are now all sharing weapons openly, top-tier stuff, all the way up to fighter jets. I mean, the only thing next really is maybe some of their more advanced missile defense and nuclear weapons at the end of the day, right? And then, of course, their newest fighter jets, which they're not going to give to anybody. But the big problem here is that we have a gentleman by the name of, what's that colonel's name? Brenton something or other. And I don't, oh, I think I closed the tab here. But anyways, he's on record. I'll probably post a link in the description. It's a YouTube channel called The Times, and they're notoriously pro-Ukraine to the point of nauseating propaganda. Look, I'm okay to be pro-Ukraine and whatever, but when you're just spewing lies and you're not giving people the level truth, then that's problematic. But anyways, he distinctly says that he thinks we're going to see NATO troops on the ground in Ukraine by the end of the year. And a lot of people will say, well, wait a minute, isn't that going to elicit an immediate nuclear response from the Russians or a massive response against NATO? Well, not necessarily, especially if they brand it as something other than NATO. So you could have this coalition of countries come together under the auspices of something other than NATO, right? A different type of intervention that wasn't NATO related, which would not entail the invocation of Article 4 and 5, and which wouldn't then potentially, and I say potentially, bring NATO to war with the Russians. Now, why I say potentially is because Article 4 and 5 they're not hard and fast rules that necessitate NATO go to all-out war with the Russians. All it means is that all countries will come to support the country who is being attacked. So, if these F-16s are being deployed from Romania, Poland, the Baltic states, then what could potentially happen is that Russia will target them in those countries or at those military bases. They will convene an Article 4 meeting. Immediately, everybody goes to DEFCON 2 because the Russians have to assume that that's what NATO is doing, that they're getting their bombers ready and they're getting their bombers ready. So immediately there's going to be that tension. But what could potentially happen after that is that NATO decides, okay, well, we are going to respond in a conventional way, or we are going to empower the Ukrainians, giving them more tools that they need. So this is how it could escalate to the next level. Okay, now we're going to give them Taurus missiles. I do believe that it would be asking a lot for NATO only to respond by increasing the technological level of military arsenal that they're providing the Ukrainians in response to a Russian attack. I do think it's very likely that we would see a direct conventional response from NATO somewhere on the battlefield. Does that mean Russia immediately responds with a greater conventional response? I don't know. Vladimir Putin is all full of surprises, right? A lot of these guys are. Everybody's playing the strategic long game, and I don't think that anybody really wants nuclear Armageddon. Unless your name happens to be on a list, then maybe you just don't care. But actually, you know, with respect to that issue, I want to walk back a speculation I made on the Jeffrey Epstein leaked documents. Not leaked documents, but the files that have been leaked to the public. I do think, I originally thought, okay, well, maybe they're doing this now as a way to potentially take attention away from, or maybe they're doing this now, and what this is going to trigger is people who want to start a war in order to cover up that all this is happening, that the Epstein files are the primary thing that we should be fixated on. I am now thinking that it's a bit of a red herring, because immediately whenever I am presented with a situation like this in the news where everybody's immediately fixated on it, I say, okay, we all go to the immediate conclusion, like, yeah, they're trying to cover something up there. And sure, there's most definitely been some bad stuff has happened. But what is the 4D chess move here? Because we know if they wanted to, they could get anybody off scot-free. And the problem I have with these Epstein documents is that there's nothing that is really incriminating, like to the point where it's a surefire, cut and dry, guilty charge, and that a few good lawyers, a few good, you know, Johnny Cochran Dream Team style lawyers could not fight in a court of law. So it almost just seems like a wild goose chase that is going to go on for years and years. And someone had indicated to me that, you know, maybe this is just a threat to the elites, that if you don't comply with whatever sort of world war plans we want to enact right now, then maybe we are going to have to release some tapes. You know, was this a proverbial shot across the bow, as they say, in an attempt to signal that, you know, we could completely end your career unless you give us all the support that we need for whatever war we want to get into right now, whether it's in the Middle East, involves Israel, involves Ukraine. Who really knows at this point? Is it all connected? Is anybody's best guess. But I want to walk back a little bit my prediction that they're going to have to do something before January 22nd, because this list is going to be so indicting for whoever is involved that it's going to, they're going to want to cover it up by starting a war. If anything, they're putting it out there for the purpose that Epstein existed in the first place, which was to blackmail people, right? It was to blackmail people to ensure that they complied and they played ball with whatever sort of Machiavellian plans they were going to hatch. And maybe that's what this is. This is a threat saying, hey, you know, we have the capability to end you, so get us that funding we need. I guess time will tell, and we're going to find out. GPS jamming around Kaliningrad, that has been a very big thing lately. We talked about this last month when I was consulted by somebody who had a lot of insights about this particular issue, saying that there was a lot of GPS jamming exercises occurring in and around the United States, and that these are due with for strategic purposes, meaning that it is in an attempt to stifle the other side's capability to launch nukes, to fly their planes, and just direct their ordnance to the appropriate place. So this is ramped up in recent weeks, and it's stemming from Kaliningrad. And so it's affecting Poland, and it's affecting parts of Ukraine. And of course, that makes military maneuvers more problematic. Of course, we have Russia moving forward with plans to buy Iranian ballistic missiles, which I would presume would have to mean that they are very likely going to give Iran some nuclear guarantees to some extent, because why would Iran be putting itself in a situation by giving its ballistic missiles that it will very much likely need if it goes to war with Israel, or if a war erupts, unless it had some sort of reciprocity in the sense of that it gets a non-conventional protection. So I guess time will tell. This is John Kirby's address here today, and you can just tell by his body language that he's very uncomfortable with this speech.
Democratic People's Republic of Korea recently provided Russia with ballistic missile launchers and several ballistic missiles. On the 30th of December, 2023, Russian forces launched at least one of these North Korean ballistic missiles into Ukraine. This missile appears to have landed in an open field in the Zaporizhzhia region. And on January 2nd, Russia launched multiple North Korean ballistic missiles into Ukraine, including as part of its overnight aerial attack.
Now, the thing is, this is like the first we're hearing about this, like really publicly hearing about this. And this happens on the day that North Korea fires its shot across the bow. Something strange is going on there. We can definitely see that all of these conflicts are interconnected. And we also have our main man, Lindsey Graham. I made a joke about Lindsey Graham yesterday that I think that he definitely was on board one of the flights to Epstein Island, and people were saying that, well, they didn't think that he swung that way. And I would say that Epstein was resourceful enough that I'm sure he could cater to anybody's sexual proclivity. And when you watch this video, I think you'll see quite clearly who is wearing the pants in the relationship. Let's check it out.
I'm more dedicated now to bringing stability to your country in this region, because I think Iran's goal is to destroy your efforts to reconcile with the Arab world. It's a nightmare for the Ayatollah. It's an absolutely essential ingredient to a better, more stable Mideast and a safe and secure Israel and a prosperous Palestinian people. So I promise you they will not have died in vain. We're going to do everything we can on my end, and I think working with the Biden administration, Mr. Prime Minister, to push forward to make Iran's worst nightmare real. The Arabs and the Israelis move toward the light.
Well, thank you.
Okay. Why is this guy anywhere? You know, I mean, Is this his job? Isn't this the job of like a foreign minister or a diplomat? Why is this senator going around and starting wars everywhere? Who knows? This is a shot of a transformer station in Russia up in flames. There's been plenty of attacks like this. I've been talking about them in my daily updates. I just thought I would show you this just so you know that it's actually happening. These are likely acts of sabotage because, of course, the pro-Ukrainian crowd is always bragging when these events happen, and the videos come up so quickly that it makes you wonder, you know, is there somebody on the inside there? It's not a matter of wonder. Of course, there's also drones that have been striking Moscow as well. This is just Nasrallah. He's supposed to give a speech today. So on every front, we're just seeing widespread escalation. And then we have the Houthis, who now are effectively at war with the West, based on the West's ultimatum, which has been breached. And in Iran, I should say, they're chanting "Death to America." So. And you know, leave the world behind. You know, they're just like telling us what's going to happen. Leave the world behind. Remember when it said that pamphlet that said "Death to America" on it? And there you have it. Cyber attacks, GPS, planes going down. I mean, the movie's just unfolding. And in Canada, we're suffering with massive widespread drought. Still not a drop of snow on the ground where I'm at. This is a map from November 30th. The entirety of Canada is in a state of drought. In some cases, it's exceptional, which is worse than extreme. And because this is from a month ago and there's been very little to no precipitation since that time, I'm guessing that we're going to see a lot more reds and oranges in the coming month ahead when the new version is released. This is not in real time like the SPEI monitor. So food prices are going to get jacked. I really do think all of those bearish investments and those hedging of our bets is going to prove to be incredibly wise in the not so distant future. Anyways, guys, that's all I got tonight, and take care and just keep on prepping, man, because the shit is hitting the fan.